friend of mine, I learned about this incredible story about a young Marine. He's in his late 20s, I guess. A Marine veteran, a sergeant machine gunner who fought in the Iraq War and came back with a wicked case of PTSD, very, very damaged. And he ended up meeting an American philanthropist at a retreat for PTSD sufferers. And the philanthropist said to him, they were sitting on the Vancouver River, it was a fly fishing week, and the philanthropist, whose name was Charlie Annenberg, said, Charlie asked Christian, who's the name of the soldier, Christian Ellis. So Charlie asked Christian, he said, well, what did you want to do when you were a kid? You know, what were you thinking that you would be? And Christian said to him, I wanted to be an opera singer. And so here's this guy, tribal tattoos, like he's a serious badass. And he's saying to Charlie, I wanted to sing opera. And Charlie was flabbergasted. He was talking to him, he said, and then he just liked the guy. So he said, well, why don't we plug you in to this opera company that I know. Charlie's based in Los Angeles, so he's very close ties to Vancouver. And he knew a guy named Charles Barber who runs the Vancouver City Opera.
Or City Opera Vancouver.
City Opera Vancouver, thank you. So Annenberg takes Ellis to Barber and says, why don't you guys do something? This is a great, you know. So they did. They brought in a very well-known U.S. American Iraqi playwright named Heather Rappo to do the libretto. And they brought in Victoria's own Tobin Stokes to do the music. And they have created this amazing beautiful thing. And it really is, I've seen it only on DVD. And it is getting a sing-through at the Kennedy Center in March, which is like the mecca of opera. So it's like a huge deal. It's doing well. Now, that is the good story. The troubling story is what happened to Christian. And I'm going to read that. So this is the tragedy, and it really is tragic, of how Christian got to where he is. But it's the tragedy out of which this beautiful opera called Fallujah was born. So this is going to take about 12 to 15 minutes. So I go to Los Angeles to meet the inspiration for the excitement. Christian, I lean into the window of the black model Grand Am, scuffed and worn, conspicuously pulled over in valet parking at the glam Beverly Hilton, where it's Jag after Bentley after Porsche. Yeah, man, he says, get in. We've spoken on the phone several times at that point. I know the voice, musical, yes, sensitive, delicate. They called him Pretty Boy in the Corps, not because he was gay, but knowing he was gay and not caring, protecting their own. Plus, Pretty Boy contrasted well with professional Ellis, machine gunner in a combined anti-armor, that's called a CAT platoon, on react duty in the most dangerous city in Iraq, the job code and coordinates of an undisputed badass. We drive to Tavern Restaurant on San Vicente Boulevard across the freeway in Tony, Brentwood. Artisanal cheese and halibut with white corn succotash. I look around me, Ellis says, when we get to veteran life. I see how they look at me, the tattoos and the jeans, and nobody here could imagine that I sing opera. From an early age, too. He sang beautifully in the shower, his adopted mother remembers, but the demons were dark and plentiful. Born to a drug-addicted hooker in Philadelphia, Ellis's early childhood involved 13 foster homes, during which time he was, and I'm quoting, raped, molested, homeless, and starved. Michelle Ellis rescued him out of an orphanage and adopted him when he was 8, the two having forged a special connection. A Christian, morally rigorous household, the Ellis family cared for their adopted son until he was 19 and messed up in complex and individual ways. A meth-dabbling rebel with a secret taste for men, enrolled at Liberty University, where no number of Friday addresses by Jerry Falwell were going to change what was going on inside. Why don't you enlist? Sometimes a question posed by your mother comes preloaded with an answer. Ellis had graduated forensic psychology and voice performance, no job prospects. He was living with his grandparents in a Phoenix 55 and over community. He considered his mother's question and decided, if you're going to serve, you might as well do the hardest service imaginable. Of course, he made mistakes and got screamed at like any other boot, but he was like any other boot in other ways, too, disappearing out of himself and into that bigger collective thing, the Corps. When we suffered together, he tells me we got tighter. And nobody cared if you were black or white or blue or gay, Republican or Democrat. None of us cared, he says. None of us gave a shit, pardon my language, but we didn't. We experienced joy together and we suffered together, and we also knew we had to work together, which is the inner truth of service right there. All in-unit belonging was motivated by that holy work which lived beyond any individual pride or ambition, which was girded with an iron sense of righteousness. Good guys and bad guys. That was the language they used, and Ellis responded to the hardened sense of common calling. Instant, willing obedience to all orders. That's what the Marine Code says. Instant, willing obedience to all orders. You don't join the Marine Corps, you convert. And Ellis was inwardly and outwardly transformed. Something he illustrates when he says things. We were trained to enjoy going into danger. We were trained that if there was an explosion, you didn't run away, you went directly towards it. That's what Marines do. He became a professional, as the name of his unit. Just after Labor Day 2003, 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, Pendleton, California. Ellis had proved his marksmanship with the M16 and his moxie by correcting a weaponry instructor on the correct range of the 50 cal. He was assigned to Weapons Company Cat Platoon. 6 months later, he was on the choking white desert of Kuwait, standing by the heaps in the engine of military industry churning around him. They were outside Fallujah in a week. 2-1 Cat Platoon was tasked with running recon missions to find the hotspots. Ellis recalls the moment it got real, the thin whine of a bullet passing his ear as he sat in the 50 cal turret. I remember thinking, someone just tried to kill me. From that moment onward, beyond recon missions and react calls to support infantry units, mortar attacks, and the ongoing danger of IEDs and suicide bombers, Ellis says his head was constantly on the swivel, his vigilance level permanently raised. Fear taught the body, and it's a good thing too if you planned on living. Recon, react, mount up became the dreaded words. We'd be in our hooches after 15-hour patrol, just thrown off our sweaty clothes and heavy gear. We're in our skivvies lying down, and 2 most horrible words any Cat Marine can hear. Mount up, on your feet, get dressed, clean and load the weapons, gas the vehicles, gear check, then go out and have someone fire RPGs at you. A hissing sound that Ellis still winces remembering. And then the 4 contractors were killed. March 31st, 2004, they worked for Blackwater and they took a shortcut through Fallujah. Ambushed, killed, burnt, dismembered, dragged through the street and hung from Brooklyn Bridge just south of 2-1's position off the Jolan district of Fallujah, the Jolan graveyard as it was known. Mount up, Ellis and the Cat Platoon responded to the call, but by the time they were rolling, the 4 men were dead and on television already. Ellis sits silently remembering, and then he gives words to describe the moment those images were shown. Blackened bodies of dead Americans, jeering crowds. Rage, he says. I remember thinking, there's the enemy, and man, woman, and child, they will die. Of course, revenge is never as cathartic as rage allows us to anticipate. Just before the first invasion of Fallujah in April 2004, Ellis was brought to the first of his own war's deadly pivot points. Checkpoint 77 north of the city, a country road with livestock and greenery and eerily no one around. They hit the ambush without ever seeing the shooters. They took casualties and called in the F-18s. Traps, they set up a perimeter and roadblocks. It didn't take 30 minutes for a car to appear, an ordinary sedan coming on through the chicanes and the razor wire, ignoring the hand gestures, the orders to stop shouted in Arabic, into the kill zone. And Sergeant Ellis did as the help of the unit demanded. The empty M16 clipped through the windshield. Remembering doesn't get easier, despite remembering every day, every morning, every night, every hour. We did the dead check, he says, voice faint. And what I saw when I looked in the car destroyed my life. Literally on a daily basis, it has fucked up my world. A father and mother and 2 little boys, 5 or 6 years old. We don't talk for a while. Ellis needs air. We take a break and drive back to the hotel. Ellis sits in the lobby looking away from me, but I can tell he wants to finish. He wants me to appreciate the arc of this story downwards to despair. After the first aborted invasion, Ellis recalls a tense intermission in Fallujah during which 2-1 did recon and patrolled the perimeter of the city. At camp, he befriended a local boy named Wissam, 14 years old, who sold the Marines DVDs. He introduced himself to Ellis one day by writing his name on Ellis' palm. He was a good kid, full of life, Ellis said, the kind of kid who would have been popular in high school. Haunted already by what he'd done and seen, Ellis returned kindness, but he can't smile remembering it, because a few weeks later the boy was killed, his throat slit by the Mujahideen for fraternizing with the Marines. Spiraling and descending, Ellis and his friends listened to drowning pool as the bodies hit the floor. They listened to themselves laughing hysterically for psyops recording.